guys, I'm here today to talk about the 12 books I read in the month of January. I'm going to talk about these in the order that I read them because I think it's interesting to hear what the first book someone picked up in the year was. So I was overwhelmed by choice on the 1st of January because I got some amazing sounding new books for Christmas and I really wanted to read them all. But in the end, that ended up being a little bit like overwhelming, and so I went for a book I'd had for a couple of years, that being One by Sarah Crossan. I felt like I wanted to read a book in one sitting, and I knew that this was a YA contemporary novel told in verse, so it was going to be a really quick read, and it was. I read this without moving from my armchair and it was delightful, and I'm so glad this was the first book I read, and this ended up being one of my favourite reads of January. So if you haven't heard about this book, which you probably have because it's been super popular on BookTube, this is about two sisters, they're conjoined twins, and they're around 16 years of age when they're told they can no longer be homeschooled because their parents can't afford it anymore, and so they're going to be sent to a public school, and they're at that age where they're trying to find their own independence and their own interests and personalities, and obviously that is very difficult for them because they're conjoined twins, because they have to be really selfless and really gracious to the other one's needs. And we're being told this from the perspective of the sort of quieter, more subdued sister. Now I think that is a little bit of a trope. When we're told stories about sisters who are really close, we are usually told from the perspective of a quiet sister, and the other sister is usually really loud and voracious, and this is certainly the case, but I do think that was really well handled. I like the way it was told in verse. It doesn't really feel like super like poetry to me, but it just really has a nice rhythm to it, which I enjoyed. So I'd certainly read more YA books in verse because I thought that really worked. I thought this was handled with a lot of tact. The author doesn't have personal experience of knowing any conjoined twins that I could tell, but she has done an awful lot of research. I felt this book was filled with like happiness, hope, lots of joy, attention to detail. It was also very, very sad, and outside of these two sisters they have a younger sister who has her own issues, and then their mother and father are having a lot of complications at the moment, so it didn't feel like they were in a vacuum, which I think can be the case with some YA contemporary. There was a family around them who were their own characters, and I just really enjoyed this. The only comment I have, which isn't really a negative, is that I was convinced for the first 30 pages that this was a British YA novel because it just felt like a British YA novel. I think there's a really different tone to British and American YA novels. And then something was referenced which made it very clear this was set in America. So for the rest of the novel I was just a bit thrown because it didn't feel particularly American. And then when I read the author's bio, it turns out she was born in the UK, lived there for most of her life, has spent a couple of years in New York, but has since come back to the UK. So I wonder if any American readers have read this and just felt like it didn't ring particularly true, because, I don't know, this just felt quite British to me. So that's just an observation really, but I really enjoyed this and I definitely recommend it, and I'll 100% read all of her other books, so I thought that was great. The next book, sadly, wasn't so great, and it was Flame of Sevenwaters by Juliet Marillier. I haven't got a ton to say because this is the 6th book in a sort of historical romance fantasy series, the first one being Daughter of the Forest. I love Daughter of the Forest and I love the 2nd book, and then I thought the 3rd was still pretty good, but these last few have been not great. Yeah, I think a big problem with Juliet Marillier, at least with this series, is her editor, because there's so much where her editor should have just cut it. Like, you're really spoon-fed the characters' thought process and emotions. The character takes way too long to figure things out, but you as the reader have figured out 300 pages before. The romance wasn't great. I just found it all a bit meh. And I find that when Juliet Marillier moves into the fairy realm, which she does in these last 3 books in the series, I just don't enjoy it as much. I think it's much better when the characters are grounded in historical Ireland, and then they know about the fae, but they don't sort of directly interact with them. I think that's much better. So I gave this, like, I think 2 stars. I didn't think it was very good at all, and if you read this series, I would recommend like just reading the first 3 and then stopping. But obviously I get that if somebody told me that when I'd read the first 2 and they were so amazing, I would have carried on. So I think that's, you know, down to everyone individually, but yeah, I really didn't enjoy this one. The next book I read is a non-fiction, and it's called White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson. So I was actually reading this in December, and I put it down for quite a while and decided I wanted to pick it back up and finish it. Now, if I had done a recent 5-star predictions video, I would have put this book in it and I would have been very wrong. I ended up giving this book 3 stars, which I'm so sad to say because I think it sounded amazing. So the concept of this is that Carol Anderson works through history, from slavery, through emancipation, through the civil rights, through Obama's time in office to the present day. And she looks at any sort of civil liberties that have been given to African Americans and then the reaction of white rage to pull that back. And I thought that was a brilliant notion, a really excellent way to study the history of African American rights in America, obviously. But I just felt like in the introduction she sort of expounds on her thoughts on how white rage is always the result of any liberties given to African Americans, but then she doesn't really expound on her argument much more throughout the book. So each chapter focuses on an era in America's history, and she gives you loads of facts. It's very focused on law and politics, which I find slightly difficult as a non-American reader, because obviously, you know, I think it's always difficult to understand another country's politics, but for me I find it particularly difficult because of all the different states and how they have like different laws that apply. So she'll talk about something that happens, like for example giving African American people the right to vote, and then she'll talk about all the different states, particularly the southern states, and how they reacted to that, and then she'll talk about how they all react in different ways. That can be just a tad confusing, and I think to handle something like this you need a lot longer. She does it in 180 pages, which I think is too short an amount of space to do such a large history any justice. So you feel like you're just getting fact, 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 and not much actual discussion of what those facts mean. And I think if I read this as my first book on the topic, I'd probably think this was excellent, but having read books like, for example, Opposite Ends of the Spectrum, we have The New Jim Crow, which is by Michelle Alexander and focuses on a specific topic of mass incarceration to do with unfair laws on drugs that target African Americans. So that's really a niche focus, and it gives her a lot of room to give you context, to give you stories of real people, which I think really matters to me as a reader. And then you have another book like Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, and that book is massive, and it's, you know, focused on the history of racism throughout the US, but it just has way more space to tell you what this book is. So I don't know, I think this book sits somewhere in between, and it just fell a bit short for me, which was a real shame. So I give this 3 stars because I still think it was interesting, and there were some bits I really enjoyed and like read out loud to Johnny and got a lot from, but in general I sort of had to plod my way through this because I found that there just wasn't enough context and it felt a little bit dry, and I didn't feel like there was much rage on the author's part. Like when I read books like this, I do want the author to be present and I want to hear their opinion, and I didn't really feel like we got that with this book. So yeah, there's that one. The next book I listened to on audio, and that's Blue Monday by Nikki French. You probably heard Jen raving about this series last year, so I decided to pick this up. I quite enjoyed it. I didn't think it was amazing, but it was a nice audiobook to listen to. So this is the first book in I think an 8-book series where we focus around a woman called Frida Klein, who I think is, I always get confused, a psychologist, I think. And she gets involved in this book with a crime of a child who's been abducted, and to do with the patient she sees, she sort of gets pulled into this case. And I haven't read much crime, so I can't really comment, but from people who have read more crime, I think the commentary seems to be that this is much slower paced and much more character focused than your sort of typical books in the genre. I enjoyed this. I thought it was well narrated. I liked the story. I thought it was interesting, and I was intrigued to see where it was going to go, and it was fun guessing. I did find a couple of things frustrating, which I think for me put me off the series a little bit, and I know one of these things is something Jen mentioned. Frida doesn't use a mobile phone, which to begin with is fine. Like if she doesn't want to have a mobile phone, that's absolutely fine. She's not particularly social, she lives quite an independent life, fine. But when she gets involved in a case at which a child's life is on the line, and she could, you know, give information back way quicker and also look after her own safety much more effectively if she just carried a mobile phone, it becomes a bit annoying that she doesn't, because it feels like a construct of the novel to put Frida in more difficult situations, which wouldn't happen if she just had a mobile phone. I just don't think the author deals with that very with much subtlety or tact. So I enjoyed these. I think they're cosy crimes to listen to, and I'll probably carry on, but I'm not desperate to, and I do wonder how much those things will continue to annoy me and put me off. We shall see. The next one I've got from the library, so I've already taken it back, but it was What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, and this is edited by Michelle Filgate. This is a collection of essays by 15 different writers talking about their relationships with their mothers, focused on things they don't discuss. Now, this wasn't quite what I expected, but I still really enjoyed it. So some of the essays were completely what I expected. They were about things that had happened in the author's relationship with their mother, whether they were during childhood, adolescence or adulthood, that for whatever reason they don't discuss. And some of those things were really traumatic things. For example, like with Michelle Filgate, who did the opening essay, it was about the fact that her stepfather was abusive towards her and her mother ignored it and wouldn't acknowledge it. There's essays like that. The Carmen Maria Machado essay I thought was absolutely excellent as well, and she's estranged from her mother, and I thought that was really a powerful essay and very well written. It makes me really excited to read her new memoir. And some of them aren't like that. The final essay in the collection is by Leslie Jamieson. I've never read anything by her before, but that was an essay about how much she adores her mother, how they're best friends and she loves her more than anyone, but that her mother had a first marriage when she was in her early 20s that Leslie Jamieson doesn't know much about, and she decides that's something she'd like to learn about. So she goes and finds her mother's ex-husband and has a day out with them and talks to them about it, and he wrote a novel about it, so she reads that. And it's just about her talking about this version of her mother she never knew. So there's lots of different interpretations. Now, I think reading a collection like this is always difficult because giving it a rating is really hard. I, in general, thought that half of the essays were like 4 and 5 stars and the other half were like 3 stars. So I gave this 4 stars because I really enjoyed it. I'd highly recommend it. And it made me find lots of new writers that I want to try more of. Naomi Manawira's essay was phenomenal. Andre Ackerman's essay was really amazing. I also really enjoyed the essay by Kiese Lehmann, obviously, and there was just a lot of other authors I really enjoyed and definitely want to pick up more of their work. So yeah, I'd highly recommend this. I think it's a great way to find new writers, and I think if you have an interest in people's sort of family relationships and dynamics, I do, I'm very nosy, then this is definitely one to pick up. The next book I'm going to talk about I had on pre-order, and it's easily my favourite book of the month. No surprise here, and that is Long Bright River by Liz Moore. I think you're going to hear a lot of people talk about this. This is a fantastic book which I think will call to people who are literary fiction readers but who are also genre fiction readers, because this is a blend between literary fiction and crime drama, and I thought it was excellently handled. I read this in 2 sittings, in 2 sort of 2-hour stints, and I didn't move from my chair during those times. I stayed up way too late on work nights. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. I still love The Unseen World more, but this was very close to being as good as that. So this is a contemporary novel which is set in Philadelphia, in quite a impoverished neighbourhood which has a big issue with drugs and with sex workers. And we follow 2 sisters, and we're being told the story from Mickey's perspective. She's slightly older, they're both in their early 30s, and Mickey is a sort of on-the-beat police officer. And in her neighbourhood, at the start of the novel, a woman's body is found, and Nikki believes that this woman was strangled and she was a sex worker, they believe. And her sister has been a drug addict for many years and also a sex worker, and they're quite estranged from one another. And Mickey cannot find her sister, and as the body count starts to mount, Mickey gets more and more concerned that maybe her sister is going to be somehow involved with this serial killer. And so this novel darts between the present and the past, their childhood. And in the present, Mickey is becoming really obsessed and doing quite dangerous things. And she also has a very young son, and it's about that conflict of working a job that uses up a lot of her hours. She's a single parent, the relationship she has with her son, and sort of how lonely she is really outside of that relationship with him. And then the storyline of the past is about how her and her sister went from being very close. They were raised by their grandmother after their mother died of a drug overdose and their father left. And their grandmother didn't really give them much love and affection. And they grew apart. They took different choices. Mickey went on to really focus on education, whereas her sister sort of got pulled away in what Mickey viewed as like, a messed up crowd of people and started doing drugs and other things. And the past narrative slowly catches up to the present. and I thought this was brilliant. I don't want to say any more about the story of this family because stuff is revealed which is brilliant, and some people may guess it, but I think a lot of people wouldn't, and I think it's excellent. And even now I can't quite figure out how I feel about it, so I think that's really well done. Like, Mickey is a judgmental character, but you feel like Lismore writes both the sisters without judgment, which I think is really hard to do with a story of this nature. The neighbourhood was captured to perfection. I had read half this book and then I went and looked on Google Maps because the street she's talking about are real streets, and it was exactly as I'd pictured it. I couldn't believe it. The people she describes, the life they lead, she describes it with such like obvious love and affection. And this novel is depressing, it's bleak. I read it not feeling depressed, but I read loads of people's reviews and they were like, oh my god, this book was the most depressing book I've ever read. And when I stepped back, I was like, actually, yeah, I mean, it is. Like, you know, not only is there lots of horrible things going on in this neighbourhood, but Mickey herself is a really lonely character. I mean, that's quite hard to read at times, but I just couldn't put it down. Now, the only criticism I have which stopped me from giving this 5 stars is that towards the end, from being a novel which really is not focused on the serial killer, is not focused on the mystery, I think Lismore decided she needed to come back to that and sort of wrap it up, and it's just a bit rushed and a couple of sort of annoying silly things happen. And the other thing is that a couple of things are revealed which Mickey's like, oh my god, shocking, and I don't think she would have been shocked by those things. I don't think as a police officer who works in that area she would have been so naive, and that was just a tad unbelievable. But other than that, I absolutely love this book. I'd 100% reread it, and I'd recommend it to so many readers because I just think it speaks to such different types of readers, so loved it. The next one I listened to on audio, and that is Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower by Brittney Cooper. So I'm a bit annoyed with myself about this one because I think it was only around 6 hours on audio, so it must be quite a short book. I loved it. I thought it was brilliantly narrated by the author. I've got cat fluff on the end of my nose, and I just thought it was really well done. I thought this was the perfect blend between memoir and sort of social commentary. I really love the mix of those two things. I love the context that a memoir brings to social commentary. I thought she was incredibly articulate, intelligent, hilarious and angry, but as she says, with eloquent rage. So I thought this was brilliant. I think everybody should read it, but I do feel like it was the wrong way to go on audio. She narrates it brilliantly, but there's so many amazing facts in this, and one of the chapters that I thought was the best and really stood out to me, and I wish I had this in print, so I'm definitely going to pick this one up and hopefully reread it this year because, you know, it's quite a short book, so that should be quite easy to do. There was a chapter where she really focuses on the fact that African-American women are majority of sort of breadwinners in their household. In a lot of households they are the sole income provider, and then she also focuses on the disparity between black women in America wanting to date black men and how many black men date white women, and how a lot of black men feel sort of emasculated by black women because they earn a lot of the money, and how restricted they are, how they're told to strive for perfection, to be brilliant, but as soon as they are brilliant, in particular as it pertains to academia, they're seen as too loud, as too successful, and that makes black men like less interested in them. You know, that's a sort of generalisation, but she gives you lots of facts that back that up, and I thought that was really interesting. Also, a chapter I thought was excellent was really focused on the Clinton administration, and she talks about the song Gold Digger and how that song came out at the same time as the term welfare queens was termed, and how African American women really couldn't win because at the same time as they were being broadcast as welfare queens, as women who didn't earn any money and just lived on welfare checks and just stole from all these, you know, lovely white people who are working so hard, you're also supposed to believe that black women are gold diggers and will just want to be with you for your money, and they're absolutely loaded and they're walking around with their, you know, their Louis Vuitton bags and all this stuff, and how living through that time meant you just couldn't win. Like, what were you supposed to be? Were you supposed to be successful and therefore a gold digger, or were you supposed to be not unsuccessful, and therefore a welfare queen. So I thought she articulated all that brilliantly, and I wish I had it in print. The only thing that stopped me from giving this book 5 stars was something I also noticed in Morgan Jerkins' essay collection, although it bothered me way more in that book. She talks a lot about how she's been celibate for a lot of years. Brittney Cooper is older than Morgan Jerkins, so she has lived, quite a few years not in relationships and celibate, and she really struggles with that, with what that means for her confidence and her belief in herself and how attractive she is both physically and mentally. And in Brittney Cooper's book, the only issue I had with that was as it pertains to straightness. I think this book just needed to be more queer. So she writes about how she has a group of friends who of girlfriends who send each other photos of their body and really big one another up and say, you're so beautiful and all this, and how amazing that is. And how she really struggles to find men who have her feminist beliefs and all this stuff, but she continues to expound on how all these black women she has in her life are amazing and how they have these amazing feminist beliefs, but she never delves into being queer. She comments on other people, but she never explores that, and I think that was a missed opportunity to comment on how black men are more attracted to white women in general, but not to comment on how she was in general thought black women were beautiful, amazing, held the same beliefs as her, but yet never considers having a relationship with one of them. I don't know, I found that a bit... I'm not even saying she has to be queer, I'm just saying that I think to not acknowledge it and to not discuss it was a bit frustrating, and it just made the book a bit too straight for me. So I found that a bit frustrating, and that's what stopped me from giving it 5 stars, but I'd highly recommend it, although I would say, I think, for me, I don't remember stuff brilliantly, like facts, on audio, so if you're a reader like that, then I'd recommend giving it a go in print. Okay, we're getting there. So then I read a couple of graphic memoirs, the first one being I Was Their American Dream, a graphic memoir by Malaka Gharib. I thought this was really interesting. So this is about the fact that her father is Muslim Egyptian and her mother is Catholic Filipino, and they both raised her in the US for a few years, and then they got divorced and her father moved back to Egypt and had a second family, and she would go stay with him in the summer. And she lives in an area of California, I think, which is very diverse, but a lot of the other students are very grounded in their ethnicity and they know who they are and they don't have this push and pull that she has. So during the school year, she lives with her Filipino family, she eats lots of Filipino food, she follows her mother's Catholic belief system, and she is raised to a Filipino sort of family model. And then she goes to her father's for the whole of the summer holidays, and he's like, no, you can't eat pork, and you shouldn't be interested in these things, and you're being too westernized, and this is how we do things. And she feels really conflicted. She speaks 2 languages, she has 2 belief systems, her parents are people she feels just never really would have fit together, and she doesn't really understand it, and then she feels this real confliction with who she is. This is brilliantly done. It's done all in primary colours like this, which I think really worked. She talks really graciously about her family. I thought it was really funny. This is sort of like good talk in the exploration of race and ethnicity, but much more focused on her childhood and her personal experiences. And I'd highly recommend this. I thought this was really enjoyable, and I'd definitely sort of look out for her as an author in the future and see what she does. The next one, sadly, I didn't enjoy as much, and that is Unbecoming by Una. And I have meant to read this one for a few years. I saw a couple of people haul it quite a while ago, and then when I was in the library the other day collecting a book, I saw that this was in stock, so I thought I'm going to pick it up. This is a graphic memoir, sort of focused on 2 things. This author grew up in Yorkshire in the 1970s, and around that time there was a serial killer who was publicised as killing sex workers, which was later found to be untrue. He was killing women basically, but the police fixated on them being sex workers, and because of that didn't identify who he was for many years and allowed many other attacks and murders to happen. And so it's about her living through that time and the way these crimes were discussed, the way women were commented on, you know, the way women were told they should stay indoors and not go out in the dark, but men weren't really told anything. And also during that time period, she is sexually assaulted several times in different circumstances by different men. And it's really a commentary on women's bodies, particularly in, you know, the sort of 70s and 80s. And, you know, it's sort of towards the second half, much less of a memoir and much more of an education, where she tries to be like, okay, let's look at the facts. Why would you think this when this is how it actually is? And she sort of tries to sort of, I guess, change your mind. So I didn't love this. I've read her more recent graphic non-fiction book, Crate, which I didn't think was great either. I don't know what it is. I feel like what she's writing about is fascinating to me. Like, I love all this stuff. I find it so interesting, and it's really important to me. But I just don't think she feels a bit directionless. It doesn't pull me in emotionally, and I don't think I think the memoir aspect she darts away from, and you never feel like you truly know her or what her life was really like during that time. And the non-fiction section, I feel like, you know, you're going to pick this up if you already agree with her, and so she's telling you stuff where you're like, yeah, of course, like, I agree. And she doesn't really go deeper than stuff I've already thought, and I don't think she delivers it in a way that's like super new or powerful. So yeah, I sort of read this and was just like, okay, like, that was that, and I'm done, which is a real shame. So I think loads of people could love this. It's got really high ratings. I think this is a taste thing. I don't think the way she presents her graphic books work for me, but I'm sure they'd work for a lot of people. And then at this point, I'd read all those in the first like 2 weeks of the month, when I was like, I am on a fucking roll. I'm loving this. And then I just stopped reading, and I really struggled in January. I do not mind the cold or the dark, but I do mind, you know, being back at work after having a couple of weeks off, and I really struggle with it, and it just makes me feel quite low. And so I sort of just, yeah, had a bad week and didn't really feel like reading anything. And one day I was on my way to work and I started listening to a new non-fiction book, and I was like, fucking hell, like, and it was another sort of social justice book, and I was like, I can't do this, I'm already depressed enough. And so I decided to pick up Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb on audio, which is the first book in the Farseer trilogy. I absolutely loved these books. I think I read them in 2015 or 2016. Raved about them. I read the whole series of Robin Hobb's books, which is a lot, and I've never reread them, and I should. And I bought this one on audio and I'd never listened to it, and so I started listening to it. I listened to nearly all of it on audio, and the last 2 chapters I read in physical form because I just wanted to finish it because I was loving it so much. I don't love the audiobooks because I think the audiobook narrator is a much older man, and, you know, we start with Fitz being like 5, so it just doesn't sound right really. But I love this book. I'd still give this 4 stars because, like, I know that some of them are significantly better than this one, so I couldn't give this more than 4, even though, like, what it means to me is more than 4 stars. And this is the first book in an epic fantasy trilogy. It sounds really tropey. It's about a young boy who doesn't realise he has royal bloodline, and then when he finds out, he also finds out he has a couple of amazing abilities, and he's really important, okay? All those things sound quite tropey, but actually it isn't tropey. And it says on the front, this is from George R. R. Martin, in today's crowded fantasy market, Robin Hobb's books are like diamonds in a sea of circons. Is that how you say it? Circons? Like fake diamonds. And I completely agree, and it's frustrating how much I agree, because I've tried to read a lot more epic fantasy after this, and I've DNF'd so many books because no one comes close to the way I love slow literary fantasy, and I found nobody who does it like Robin Hobb. Nobody. This is super slow, really focused on characters. There's so many characters in this, and they're all so well handled. You feel like you know them all intimately, and I just love it. And revisiting it, knowing what's going to happen to Fitz, is devastating. So I'm going to carry on with these and hopefully read them all in the first half of the year. That's what I'd like to do. Okay, we're nearly there. So I read Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. My Patreon book club voted for this one. I give them 3 books to choose from, and then this month I filmed a reading vlog. This is for my tier 3 on Patreon, so if you are a tier 3 on my Patreon, then I will have uploaded a reading vlog of all my thoughts on this today. I'm not going to talk about this a lot here because obviously I've spent a lot of time already talking about it in that video. I love Jesmyn Ward's writing style, and if you don't know, she really focuses on like metaphors and similes, lots of descriptions like of people's bodies, of the landscape, and this is very slow paced, like not much plot, but I think she writes beautifully. Now this focuses on a family in the days leading up to Hurricane Katrina, and it's told from the perspective of a teenage girl who knows that she's pregnant at the start of the novel, but her family don't know yet. And at the same time as she's finding out she's pregnant, her brother's fighting dog has just given birth to some puppies. And so there's lots of commentary on him trying to keep these puppies alive, and her trying to, you know, come to terms with the fact that she's going to be a mother. And I, right up until the end, was going to give this 4 stars, and then actually the last few chapters, you know that there's going to be some bit of the books that focus on the hurricane, and there is, and I just think that was handled a bit too quickly. Now, there's parts of me that loves Jesmyn Ward's writing, and I'll read anything she brings out, and I have a couple more of her books to read, which I will certainly read. But I do feel that, it's particularly in this book, something I really noticed is that our main character doesn't really, so she's pregnant from one of her brother's friends, and the only thoughts she has are as pertains to loving him, and other than that she doesn't think about anything. Okay, she thinks about the fact that she's going to be a mother and that she loves him, but loads of awful things happen throughout this novel, loads of really dangerous situations, and as soon as someone asks her to get involved, she'll just say yes and do it. And that's certainly a comment on who she is as a character, but as a reader who loves like detailed character exploration and lots of internal thought, you just don't get that. So this sort of feels like a plotty novel that isn't. So you have a lot of plot, and in place of where you'd have character thoughts, you have loads of descriptions, beautiful descriptions. Like, I've never thought so much about somebody's muscles and the sweat on their body, and I loved all of her family. But I think that without the character having lots of sort of internal thoughts, I just couldn't connect to her as much, and I couldn't care as much about the outcome. And I do think a tiny bit that maybe she overdoes the similes. Like, a lot of people have an issue with her writing because of that. I love descriptive writing, but I do think that perhaps she should pull back a little bit. So yeah, I'd give this like 3.5 stars. It was very nearly a 4, but yeah, I did sort of read the ending and just feel a bit like, okay, like, I don't know. So yeah, but I will read every book she brings out, so there's that. And then just last night I decided to pick up This Was Our Pact by Ryan Andrews. This is a graphic novel, like a children's graphic novel, and I decided to give this a go. This is a like adventure story about some boys who follow some lanterns they've released in their river, and they want to find out where the lanterns go. And this is very fantastical. There is a talking fishing bear, and they find this sort of village in the sky, and they find all these creatures and a giant dog. And the art is lovely. So you start off with it being sort of quite blue and grey toned, and then as they come across the fantastical world, the colour palette changes and it becomes, you know, pink or like really bright blue. And yeah, I thought it was really beautifully done. I gave this one 3 stars. I think there's a limit to how much I can enjoy children's graphic novels, because obviously you can't have a ton of depth there because you've not got a lot of space, and they are, you know, action adventure stories. I think children would love this, and I really enjoyed it, but there's a limit to how much I can get out of it. Like, I think this will probably be quite forgettable to me. So yeah, enjoyed it. I would say if your library has it, then give it a go, but I wouldn't say you should run out and grab your own copy. So there is that one. So there's all the books I read in the month of January. Please let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. Let me know what your favourite read of the month was and what your first read of the month was. I'd be interested to know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.